chat or raise your hand so we can do that and get going with it. Kurt, we're going to turn it over to you to tell us a little about who these guys are. I know you sent stuff out on everybody, but you know them and can do a little introduction and we'll get rolling.
Well, some of you guys, I don't talk a lot on these, but you guys I've been helping Dennis put this together for a couple of years now. And I work with Dennis and Terry at the Paulin Institute as well. So, but I've been traveling a fair bit down to Central America up until COVID hit, where I met Dean at a small hotel on our way out. Dean works with the Rainforest Alliance down there and is a faculty member at University of Minnesota in the forestry department. And I kind of started thinking about, you know, one of the areas is obviously climate change and what sorts of things we've been doing over time. And I was really interested in what Dean was doing because he's trying to marry, or he's working with the Rainforest Alliance to marry economic benefit to sustaining the rainforest. So we got talking a bit. He introduced me to Jose Roman, who I believe is either joined or will join later.
Yep, he's with us, Kurt.
Okay, okay. And oh, there you are. Gotcha. Hi.
Nice to meet you.
And so we chatted once. Some point in time, I will get down to see you. Did not make it this spring, but I'd love to hear. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say. So.
And Kurt, I said that Dean certainly has an appropriate name for academia. I assume he gets all of his phone calls returned anytime they hear from Dean Current. Name your kid Provost or Dean, you'll be in good shape. Welcome, Dean.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting us. We're really looking forward to this, especially the discussion at the end, and hope you enjoy what we're able to present. Little background on myself. My background is forestry. I got a bachelor's in forest management from the University of Missouri. Worked for about 7 years, did Peace Corps in El Salvador, worked for a forestry consultant. But I think what came out of those experiences was the need to understand the economics of systems that we promote when we're looking at conservation, especially if we're working with small farmers, as I worked for about 10 years in Costa Rica, but worked throughout Central America in that process. Just want to mention a couple of things that came out of that experience. One was that we did a region-wide, actually Central America and the Caribbean, evaluation of forestry, agroforestry, farm forestry projects. And what really kind of came to the surface on that was, you know, if you provide benefits to the farmers, they'll plant trees. And it was something new for them in most cases. And if there was a market, then they'd plant more trees. So it was a way to really promote this reforestation in areas that had been heavily deforested, but using the market, using benefits to the farmers was very important in that whole process. Later on in my work in Central America, we had a project looking at secondary forest management. That's forests that come up after deforestation, after agriculture, but sometimes areas recover if they're left fallow. And we had farmers on the Atlantic side of Nicaragua who had trees that were growing on their properties, and carpenters on the Pacific side of Nicaragua, which is where most of the population is, that needed those species. And so it's something we looked at as an opportunity. And basically what we did was set up a meeting between the two parties, the farmers from the Atlantic side and the carpenters from the Pacific side. And we didn't have to do very much. We introduced them and they walked out of that meeting with a contract. So, you know, there are these market opportunities out there. A lot of times it's just making those connections with the market, and they are very powerful in driving conservation and improved livelihoods. Obviously, you need to structure them that way, but it is kind of an opportunity. So I'll kind of move into my work. So I spent about, again, 10 years between 1988 and 2000 in Central America working on conservation, forestry projects, and promoting adoption of forest management and reforestation. Came back to Minnesota in 2000 and then did some consulting, but ended up working with CINRAM, which is a Center for Integrated Natural Resources and Agricultural Management. And it is a partner-based organization. We work with a lot of outstate folks and looking at how we can promote the adoption of sustainable integrated land use systems in Minnesota. We linked expertise of the University of Minnesota, all of the resources we have here, but with the experience and insights of people from outside of the university in Minnesota and back in Guatemala, as we'll be talking about as well, to really look at what's going on in the landscape and how we can promote change that will lead to more sustainable land use systems and development and benefits for local communities, rural communities in the case of Minnesota. So that's kind of what CINRAM is. And I always tell people that I worked in Central America promoting land use systems that were more sustainable. And I'd say that our work hasn't changed that much in principle. Obviously, conditions are very different, but really it's looking for those opportunities where we can use things like markets to drive adoption of systems. Oftentimes, there is a policy context there that governments come in, provide some incentives to get these things started. But if you get benefits, a lot of these efforts will take off on their own. So we talk about things like productive conservation and market-based conservation. And so for our work, we really look at things like public and private sector partnerships. In conservation, there was a time when working with the private sector was kind of working with guys with the black hats, the bad guys. But what we've seen is there's, and this is something that has increased over time, a lot of interest on the private sector for social and environmental impacts of their work, but also in their regular, supply chains, often making them more sustainable, has benefits on the bottom line as well. Looking at generating livelihood improvements through markets, so making sure that the benefits do end up in the communities that are doing the work, the farmers that are doing the work, and using those market incentives really to drive landscape change, which we need in many cases. We have a lot of systems on the landscape that are not very sustainable. And then one of the things that's particularly important, well, anywhere, but really in Guatemala, is adding value to the forests through markets. Again, if we go back 20, 30 years, there was a lot of emphasis put on preserving forests, that you wanted to define that forest area and keep people out. Everyone, Rainforest Alliance, conservation organizations now realize you have to work with the communities, and we see opportunities there that if the forest represents a value for these communities, these people, they'll preserve it. And the experience in Guatemala over almost 25 years now has demonstrated that as well. And I think Jose Ramon will talk more about that, but it's pretty impressive. Quickly, I want to talk a little bit about our work in Minnesota. So when I came back in 2000, I started managing CINRAM. One of the things that we focused on was water quality issues in the Minnesota and Mississippi River basins. So out of that effort that started back then, working with folks in agronomy, forestry, applied economics, there has kind of emerged this Forever Green initiative, something that has been going on for 5-8 years now, something like that, but it really has roots back in the early 2000s or before then in a lot of the folks at the university. So we really were looking at getting more perennials on the landscape, continuous living cover to address water quality issues that we have several. And that's something we probably share with Wisconsin, that because of our agricultural practices, a lot of the chemicals that are applied to our fields do end up in the water. So if you have a perennial crop, it takes up those chemicals, it maintains the soil, improves soil health. So in some cases, you don't need as many chemicals, you don't need to cultivate it as much, and that has definite environmental impacts and benefits. So it's really the effort is looking at how we diversify economic opportunities for our rural areas, enable abundant production. And if you're putting in new crops, alternative crops, you have to make sure they're productive enough to be competitive in the market, but also making sure that they are adapted to changes in climate and any pest and disease pressures that might happen. Improving the conditions of water, land, and biodiversity. And then, as I've been saying, enhance the rural communities by developing new industries based on these new practices, these new opportunities that do support the communities, and hopefully getting services back into many of our rural communities. And finally, really to attract high quality talent to the University of Minnesota for our future workforce needs in agriculture, food, energy, and natural resource management. And it's really, I mean, for me, it's been great working at the University of Minnesota and working with students. They have ideas, and it's they do some really good work for us. These are just some of the crops that are included in that Forever Green initiative. Kernza is a perennial grain. Intermediate wheatgrass is another name for it. And it's something they've been working on the genetics probably at least 20 years now, but they've gotten to the point where they have seed now, and that's low quantities. They have to work on seed production as part of all this, but that can be used by folks like General Mills. They are very interested. They're putting money into this program and would like to have a line of products that use this perennial grain, getting away from the annuals a little bit, but not entirely. And then cover crops is another major area where a lot of work is being done. One of the things that's interesting about the cover crops is they're looking at pennycress, and actually PepsiCo has demonstrated an interest and also is investing in this. It's an oil crop that could be used to make plastics for PepsiCo's bottles. But what it would do is, right now, a lot of our cover crops, you put them on for the conservation benefit, and we provide incentives for that. But with a crop like pennycress as a cover crop, it could be harvested and generate another source of income for the farmer. So that could, avoid the need for a lot of the incentives, but then also improve the bottom line for the farmer. And we work with hazelnuts, and a lot of that is in coordination with colleagues in Wisconsin. But those are just, some of the things we're looking at there to really generate alternative crops and markets that will drive that landscape change that we'd like to see for the environmental and the social benefits. So I'm going to move to Guatemala now and talk about, this is the program that really got our work started in Guatemala. And kind of the focus again here is harnessing markets to promote community-based conservation and development. Eco-palms and non-timber forest products in the Maya Biosphere Reserve as an approach to sustainable development. Eco-palms, it's a palm that grows in the shade of tropical forests in Guatemala. They're harvested, processed locally, often with women involved in that process, and then sent off to importers in the US, Florida, Texas, and California. And they're used by churches for Palm Sunday, and I'll talk more about that as we move through this. So it's palms of the genus Commanderea. They're traded in the world floral market, which creates some opportunities looking at that market. About 600 million fronds sold annually, and that's primarily in the North America, Europe, and then in the region of Latin American region, worth about $60 to $100 million annually wholesale. And those figures are a little bit outdated. It's actually a market that's a little bit in decline, that some florists are moving on to other substitute products. It's produced primarily in Guatemala and Mexico. And traditionally it was gathered from natural forest areas and sold to middlemen. So there was some concern about this, that there were areas that were being over harvested, creating some damage, losing those populations in the forest, and that the middlemen were absorbing a lot of the profits from those sales. So we were asked, or I was asked in 2000, 2001 by the North American Commission for Environmental Cooperation to do a market study of this palm to address the issues, environmental issues, to see what two things basically. One is, would it be something that could be certified as sustainably produced? And two, could we get more benefits moving back to the harvesters and communities? So we carried out we started just looking in Minnesota, understanding the market here, and then did nationwide surveys of wholesalers and retailers. And through that process, we identified churches and Palm Sunday as a good option for a couple of reasons. One, that was a bump in the demand during the year. And at that time, churches were already buying fair trade coffee. So the concept we were talking about was not new to them. So we carried out a survey of congregations in 2003 across the major denominations. And it was very positive. People they liked the idea, they could purchase this palm and at the same time contribute to social and environmental justice. And they were willing to pay more for it. So that was very positive. We had meetings with some collaborators. We had people like, some of the organizations, fair trade organizations that are involved with different products like coffee and cocoa at that time. But we met with the communities, the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, and some of the non-governmental organizations and government agencies to discuss this, and talked about developing this program and pilot sale. And then kind of parallel to this, and this is really the initiative of Jose Roman, was to set up a meeting with Continental Floral Greens. They were the major importer of the palm in the US and our partner. And Jose Roman wanted to look at how we could get direct sales from Continental, or from the communities to Continental, to cut out some of that profit that was taken away by the middlemen. So that was moving ahead. These are the areas in Guatemala, Mexico, where most of these palms come from. Northern Guatemala is down here, and that's the area that we're working in. They're harvested again from the natural forest, primarily by men, carried in on their backs, on horses, on mules, in the back of pickups. Sometimes they'll spend a week in the forest gathering and then haul the palms out. They're brought in, taken to a warehouse, and they're then sorted and packaged. And when you get to this stage, then the women kind of take over and do a lot of the work. So they sort them to make sure they have the right quality, right size palms, put them in bunches of 20 palms, and then take 30 bunches and put them in the rolls you see there kind of at the bottom on the right-hand side. And that's how they're shipped to the US. They set them in water to keep them fresh while they're waiting for shipping. But again, that's work that's done by women and usually outside of the communities where the gathering is done. This is the value chain, the market chain, supply chain. And I'm not going to go through it in detail, just to kind of demonstrate, the kind of changes that we were looking at as we began this effort. So we have these community forests. So these communities manage what are called community concessions in Guatemala, land that was given to them by the government to manage, and they're allowed to harvest, to manage and harvest both timber and non-timber forest products, as long as they do it sustainably. And they have to be certified and have accepted management plans to do this. So you guarantee that level of sustainability. So these are gathered using these management plans from the forest by the collector. It used to be processing was done outside of the communities. Now it's done within the communities. And that's important because it's done by women. And these communities are forest communities, are relatively isolated. There's not a lot of opportunities for employment for women. So this created new jobs for women in the communities. And they took that and took advantage of it, I should say. Generating income, they help them educate their kids. But so that was kind of a change. And then really from there, it was exported to the US. And then we do have this other program with church congregations. So what we did basically, here we had that positive response from churches. In 2005, we set up a pilot program and did it. It was announced through a policy group, actually, a Christian policy group here in the Twin Cities. And so most of our sales that first year were from Minnesota, North Dakota, Wisconsin, and Massachusetts. Well, I'll get to that later, but this kind of shows the development of the program over the years. So 2005, we sold about 5,000 fronds. Again, it was a pilot program at 22 churches in 4 states. And the Thursday night, I rented a university van, filled it with palms, and headed off to Star City, North Dakota, spent the night and spent the next day, and got home about 3 a.m. on Saturday morning after delivering the palms. I had a graduate student that sent them off to Wisconsin and Massachusetts. And so I got back at 3 a.m. on Saturday, slept a couple hours, and delivered the last box to northern Minnesota to a pastor that was very worried he would not have palms for Palm Sunday. And we decided that was not sustainable, doing that. And so we worked with Hermes Floral. They were a wholesaler retailer here in the cities, just around the corner from the University of St. Paul campus. And Don Hermes said, well, Dean, talk to me next year, a couple of months before Palm Sunday, we can help you out. So again, bringing in that partner made all the difference in the world. They do all the distribution. They do it by FedEx. So that has allowed us to do what you see in this table here, that, in 2006, we went from 5 to 80,000, 360,000 up until, just under 1 million fronds starting in 2013 and 14. And it's kind of stayed at that level. We'd like to bring it up, but what that does is there's 5 cents per frond that goes back to the communities from each sale. And that's above and beyond what they earn when they harvest the palms. So we're sending roughly $50,000 a year back to these communities, and it goes back to them. They distribute it, they decide what to do with it. So it's really their decision, but we help coordinate that whole process. And it's been going on since 2005. So in the last 2 years or 3 years with COVID now, it's gone down because people are not in churches. But a lot of churches have continued to purchase kind of to support the community. So it has continued. And it's been very important for the communities during the times of COVID, when a lot of their income sources have diminished. And they get this bonus payment in April or May that has allowed them to support the community. Some of the organizations like Rainforest Alliance were actually delivering food to communities as they struggled with COVID. So the emphasis of this program is, one, sustainable harvest, environmental benefits, and training is done by Rainforest Alliance. We help coordinate, but really a lot of this work gets done on the ground with our partners. And they're Forest Stewardship Council certified, the palm production. Forest Stewardship Council is probably the premier forestry certification on a global scale. All these programs have issues. We can't avoid that, but they're reputable. They require that the communities have a 5-year management plan, and they do annual audits of their plan, making sure that it's being carried out properly. So it is a guarantee on certification. That's helped us, if we're going to the churches, they like to see that, obviously, some guarantee that, what we're hoping to see is actually happening on the ground. On the social justice, again, the additional 5 cents per palm goes directly to the community. First year, we were, taking in checks and trying to get money back to the communities. That was not, that was a little messy. But then with the Hermes Floral coming in, they send one check back to the communities through the importer, and then that gets distributed by the local communities and their organizations. And this work, again, that Jose Roman initiated, we have these direct sales from the community to the importer. that has allowed them to negotiate higher prices and again have that employment for women in the communities. And the orders have increased over time. So it really has been something that there's been an important gender issue associated with it. And the nice thing about, the benefit, this bonus payment, they decide what to do with it. But generally, they're putting that into education, scholarships for kids, making sure they have, clothes and books to go to school. They pay for teachers. They've established a health center and help stock that health center in the community with some of this funding. Some of it goes back into the business. They bought kits they send out with the men that gather the poems. They now have anti-venom kits that go out in the field with the men because there are poisonous snakes that could kill someone, basically. So now they do have that protection. So it's, again, leaving it up to the communities. They've really done a nice job on generating some of the social benefits, and those apply to the whole community, even those that may not be involved with the poem sales. Again, the partners have been very important. The environmental NGOs. We've also worked in Mexico with an environmental NGO there, and they're interested in the environmental protection and social justice. The faith-based organizations, it's kind of the stewardship and social justice. Government agencies have much better control because these communities are not doing this illegally. They have a management plan. They're paying the royalties to the government that goes into a conservation fund. The private sector, market share, new products. And it's been interesting. These folks, they like doing this. Folks at Hermes Floral, Don Hermes, the president, would be in their warehouse on a Saturday packing palms to send off to the churches. And they liked that they were doing this and that was supporting these communities. So it goes beyond just the business, but we see that as important. They have to make money, and we recognize it as well. And then for our students, it's great. It's been nice for me. This work attracts some really good students. They like the idea, what we're doing. They like the opportunity to work with Rainforest Alliance. So, and there's been other universities that have sent students there to do some of this work. And then the communities, again, it's the livelihood improvements and conservation, and they are genuinely interested in maintaining their forest. And
Dean, how big is when you say community, how big is a community? 200 people, 300 people on average?
Yeah, I would say we're just talking about 150 households maybe.
Okay.
And it varies.
And the palms is this an elevation? Is this higher? Is this in the lowest part of Nicaragua or Guatemala or the mountains?
It's the lower part.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's tropical rainforest. It's lower. And in Mexico and Chiapas, they also harvest the palms in the higher areas in the Sierra. And it's a different species that they harvest there. So there are different species within the genus of Commanderea that are used in the floral industry.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and this is a label that this would go on every bunch of 20 fronds. It just talks about where they're from, that they're natural certified forest managed sustainably by the Selva Maya communities, and then talks about the folks that are supporting it. Rainforest Alliance, the Guatemalan government through their export assistance, USAID has put a lot of money into Guatemala for these efforts for forest management and developing markets. But again, it is important. Talk quickly, so as we move forward with this, we're adding other non-timber forest products to the list. They have the cheap clay gum base, allspice, honey. But what we're seeing in terms of the market, with COVID, actually, a lot of interest in the health and immune system. So the Ramon nut, the seed from the tree, has some health nutritional properties that are important for these folks. And the woman, the main purchaser of the Ramon seed in the States, runs Techino. It's a company that makes drinks, teas, and she makes a coffee substitute using Ramon. And her focus has been health. So there is this interest with COVID. When you look at market tendencies, the younger generations, the millennials are concerned about the impact of their purchases. That's creating a market that would be receptive to some of the things we're talking about. And they're concerned about both the social and environmental impacts. And companies are increasingly interested in the social and environmental impacts of their supply chain, either because of shareholder consumer interest, but sometimes the companies themselves. I talked to somebody from the Walmart Foundation that said they buy products that are Rainforest Alliance certified. They don't necessarily tell their customers though, because someone that's going to go on Walmart often, it's the value, it's the cost of the product. So even if the customer may not be really pushing that, there is interest on the part of the company itself, to have sustainable supply chains, and a lot of companies are moving in that direction. And then concern about climate change, and we are looking at, with these efforts, restoration of forests, reforestation that could help address climate change. And really quickly, and Jose Roman can talk more about this, but they estimate that over the next 30 years, they will avoid the emission of 36 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So,
Wow.
Their ability to conserve these forests, again, Jose will talk about that, as really, it helps address climate change.
Wow.
This is something we're putting together for the Ramon seed, and this to kind of show how we're looking at, these different attributes of the product. So we talk about our program, the Forest, People, and Products. It's a traditional Maya superfood. It was used by the Mayan civilization, so it has that attribute, I guess. And then the impacts, the social and environmental impacts of the use, the purchase of this product. And then kind of looking at the functional properties, the nutritional properties, health properties, and it's tasty. And I've actually got a student that was in my fall class, an undergrad, that works for one of the local breweries, a large one, Surly's. And she's going to them with a proposal to make a beer with the seed. So, and she's excited about it. That's really fun to see. And you can make, again, baked goods and then the beverages as well.
Where does it grow, Dean?
It's throughout.
Cluster, like a grape?
It's no, it's a tree. It grows around a tree, so it's a seed. So these are one of the interesting things about the Ramon tree is it occurs in the Mayan forest at a much higher density than you would expect, and around the ancient settlements of the Maya, around the temples and pyramids where they had their population centers, and they used it. So it's very common in the forest. And so, but basically the process they go through is they wait until it has to ripen and fall from the tree. Then they gather the seed from the ground.
Okay.
And then process it.
Are they the size of hazelnuts?
Pretty similar to that. It's actually a lot like the size of coffee.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It has a lot of things in common with coffee, I guess, in terms of it has kind of a pulpy exterior when it falls, as coffee does as well, and then has that seed it's a little larger than a coffee seed. So. Yeah, so if we look at our work, again, the partnerships are very important. We couldn't do this without all the folks coming together in the public and private sector to make it work. When we talk about the poems, churches do most of the promotion of that through their environmental justice, social justice issues. Our research agenda is really defined by the communities, Rainforest Alliance in Guatemala. We try and respond to the needs that they identify. Sometimes we're involved in that process. Again, everyone brings something to the table, all of the partners, and we respect that. And then the emphasis and combination of both conservation and livelihood improvement. And again, we've seen that in Guatemala. It's really gratifying to see over time the job they've done in preserving these areas. Again, it's a long-term commitment. We plan to be there and continue to support that as long as we can, and as long as there's a need, I guess. And the university partners and students have been very important. We don't always have funding for this. My position is grant funded, so when we don't have specific funding, we have programs here at the university, the Masters of Development Practice, where the students have to do a summer field experience. They go for 8 to 10 weeks. And so they've been involved in a lot of our work on markets, the value chain, and different issues with the work we're doing. So, but again, it's the partnerships are important. So I guess with that, shall we leave the questions till the end? Or?
Well, John, John Matthews, you have something you want to ask right now? John?
Looks like he's muted.
Okay. Well, maybe we can get it. Maybe John, you said as a chat in the question, I can do it for it. Yeah, why don't we go ahead and go to Jose then? And Jose, you're in Guatemala right now, right?
Yes, it is correct. I am in the Mayan Biosphere Reserve right now.
How's the weather?
Weather now is raining. You know, it's very different than previous year, because usually during this month the summer starts, but this year is raining.
Wow. Okay. Well, tell us about your work, please.
Yeah, I will share a presentation with you right now. Okay.
Yeah, it looks good.
I will speak, and first, thank you very much for inviting Rainforest Alliance and me to speak today. I will be speaking about our work in Latin American, but specific in the Mayan Biosphere Reserve in Guatemala. So our mission as a Rainforest Alliance is, our vision is a world where people and nature thrive in harmony. And to achieve it, we are using social and market forces to protect nature and improve people's livelihoods, partnering with a diverse group around the world. Our approach, we have two core intervention and two support intervention. The field intervention is related with landscape and community. We were in the key landscape globally, but in Latin America, in some key countries. The other intervention is related with reimagining certification. We are working to improve certification for the producer and the people that participate in the value chain. And we work in advocacy, creating a condition for producers and companies. And we work with tailored supply chain services, especially with key companies that have social commitment globally. We work with a variety of value chains and products. Our main sector in Latin America are cocoa, coffee, bananas, timber and non-timber forest products, palm oils. We work with nuts such as the Mayan nut that Dr. Dean was speaking, flowers, fruits and juices, herbs and species, and coconut oil. The issue that we are addressing to face rural poverty, we are working to face growing inequality in the region, to face climate change vulnerability and deforestation. In Latin America, the main countries and landscape where we work are Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Colombia, and Brazil. In Mexico, we are working in 4 landscapes: Chiapas, Oaxaca, Jalisco, and Yucatan. In Guatemala, we are working in 4 landscapes: the Mayan Biosphere Reserve in Petén, Las Verapaces, the Highland, and the South Coast. In Honduras, we are working in 2 landscapes, in Cordillera Nombre de Dios and the Dry Corridor. In Colombia, we are working in Huila, Cauca, and Guaviare. In Brazil, in Minas Gerais, São Paulo, and Pará, and in Peru, in Cajamarca, Amazonas, and San Martin. And in those landscapes, the main sector are cocoa, banana, timber and non-timber forest products, coffee, and oil palm. Or goal and regional impacts expected by 2030 are the following. We expect to improve the best management practices in 25 million hectares and to improve the livelihoods as measured by new access to social and economic benefits of 2 million people in the region, in Latin American region. In Guatemala, we are focusing, as I mentioned, in the north part of the country, that is the Mayan Biosphere Reserve, the Las Verapaces, the Highlands, and the South Coast. Or strategies to overcome barriers are the following. We are refining our intervention in 3 landscapes. As a sustainable landscape approach that advances a thriving forest-friendly local economy through generating multiple products and environmental services, and promoted integrated planning and interface of urban, rural, and agriculture and forestry. We are building markets for timber and non-timber forest products as part of our market-based approach to conserve biodiversity. We are developing sustainable value chains for agroforestry and forest products and services in partnership with key stakeholders and the private sector. And we are working in advocacy, advisory, and supporting the government institution to create enable regulation, policies, and incentives for market-based conservation and landscape management in partnership with the private sector and local communities. The Mayan Biosphere Reserve has been a landscape where we have been working for more than 25 years. And the Mayan Biosphere Reserve was the heartland of the Mayan civilization some 200 to 900 years after Christ. But this area was facing a lot of invasion and deforestation from 1960 to the end of 1980. So the government during that time decided to create the Mayan Biosphere Reserve in 1990 that add 19% of the national territory and an area of 2 million hectares. We were in that moment in an internal war, and the internal war was just ending. And the communities that were involved in some ways in the internal war were asking for land. So the community forest concession model was created as a result of a social movement. During that time, the government created basically 3 main policies to protect and manage it in adequate way the Mayan Biosphere Reserve. And the first policy was oriented to the core zone. The Mayan Biosphere Reserve has a core zone, including national park and biotopes, that is a local category. And in that zone, the government decided to protect the biodiversity, and that those core zones will be for conservation. No human being should be in those areas, and no human economic activities should take place in that areas. In the multiple use zone, that is the center of the Mayan Biosphere Reserve, the government decided to grant concession for people that was living inside of the multiple use zone or around the multiple use zone to implement low impact activities such as sustainable forest management, sustainable tourism, and sustainable agriculture only for their own consume. And in the buffer zone that is in the south, is an area around 500,000 hectares, the government decided to legalize the land and implement low impact activities such as reforestation, sustainable cattle, and agroforestry. So after 3 years of implementation of those policies in the three main areas, in the core zone, the multiple use zone, and in the buffer zone, we can see some emblematic impacts. But before I speak about the emblematic impacts, I would like to describe you a little bit the community's forestry concession model. Today, there are 9 active community concessions in the Mayan Biosphere Reserve in the multiple use zone, and they are around 350,000 hectares, plus 2 industrial concessions. The total area under concession are 480,000 hectares. Those concessions were granted to the communities and to the industrial for 25 years with renewal contracts if the communities and in the industries meet the criteria and performance well according to the contract. The communities now are achieving the 25 years, and during this year, 7 concessions were renewed with a total area of 273,000 hectares, and now those communities have the rights to manage the natural resources for another 25 years. And that is very important because that shows that the policy, the politics that the government took 25 years ago worked, and now the communities have the renewable of their contract for another 25 years. The communities are managers of the enterprises, and they own the enterprises, but they do not own the forest. The forest and the land is owned by the government. The state, the government maintains a strong presence in all the aspects of the management, including the best management practices, the monitoring and the evaluation. The government approved the sustainable management plan, the annual operative plan, and the government give the permits to the communities. One key element as a policy that the government endorsed during the period that the concessions were granted is that each concession should be FSSC, the Forest Stewardship Council, certified after 3 years of the concession has been granted. And it happened because during that time, the Guatemalan society didn't really believe in sustainable forest management. I have the opportunity to work with the government to decide the areas of the Mayan Biosphere Reserve and to work in the political decision during that time. I was the director of the National Council of Protected Areas. And it was a lot of uncertainty about if the forest concession really will protect the forest and will provide livelihood to the people. There was a lot of opposition for international NGOs to grant the concession to the communities. And if we go back to this map, during that time, the international organization and the biologists required to the government design this biological corridor between the national park. So you can see two biological corridors here that connect this Laguna del Tigre National Park and the Mirador National Park and the Tikal and Yaxha National Park with Rio Azul National Park, because they say that this area that will be granted to the communities will disappear. And the only way that the biodiversity will communicate in between national park will be through the biological corridor. And it's why those biological corridors were set. But you will see what happened 30 years later. To assist the communities, Rainforest Alliance developed with the communities a model that start with basic certified forest management. Because the contract said that the community should be certified, so Rainforest Alliance support the communities to develop guidelines to implement best management practices. So they starting with best management practices to implement their sustainable management plans and annual operative plan with timber forest products. And then selling lumber. And then the second phase include value added for lesser known species, because at the past the communities only sold two species, mahogany and cedar, and there were more than 20 abundant species in the forest that could have markets. So, and the only way how to achieve those markets were through value added. Then the model include to incorporate non-timber forest products such as the shate palm, the ramon nuts that Dr. Ding mentioned, the allspice, the chugungong, copala, and other. And then it includes environmental services through carbon credits, avoiding the deforestation and forest degradation. And it includes forest restoration to provide a total economic value to the forest. This model today benefits more than 15,000 people directly and more than 75,000 people indirectly. And we can see some impacts after 30 years of creating the Mayan Biosphere Reserve. The community forestry enterprises generated income from 2013 to 2021, all in this period, over $60 million in sales, benefiting more than 9,000 people directly and 47,000 people indirectly in this period of time. The same community forestry enterprises, creating 9,000 full-time equivalent jobs, and from those 9,000 jobs, 23% are for women. But the most important thing is that the income from community forestry enterprises uplift communities out of poverty. And the other important thing is that the income generating for the communities has been reinvesting in education, health services, and professional development. Today, we have more than 300 jobs from the communities that now are professional. At the past, they couldn't go to schools because in those communities there are no access to high school or university education. And another important thing is that concession, this concession avoid migration. In those communities, only 2% of remittance is generated compared with 7% at the country level. And the people from the communities doesn't migrate to the United States because they have employment during the whole year from timber and non-timber forest products. And if we can see the environmental impact, if you see the deforestation trends from 2000 to 2013, you will see that most of the deforestation happened in the core zone, in the Laguna del Tigre National Park, in the Sierra Lacandon National Park, in the buffer zone, and in the multiple use zone, where the communities are working with sustainable forest management. The deforestation is close to zero. Close to zero. There is 12 times more deforestation in the core zone than in the multiple use zone. And the same trend happened with forest fire. If you see the forest fire from 2001 to 2020 in the Mayan Biosphere Reserve, you will see that most of the forest fire take place in the buffer zone and in these two core zones. And in the multiple use zone, the forest fire are much, much lesser than the core zone and the buffer zone. And why it happened? Not a miracle. It happened because the communities invest a lot of their income preventing forest fire, patrolling and controlling, and protecting the forests from illegal activities. And a very important thing, a very important shift that it happened in the last year is that the community forest concession not only are avoiding the deforestation, not only are preventing the forest fire, but also now they are restoring the degraded area. There is a huge, huge potential for forest restoration in the buffer zone. And the land tenure permit to do it because the people in that area have title, but most of the buffer zone has been dedicated to cattle ranch. So it is necessary to do a huge work to restore almost 500,000 hectares only in the buffer zone. Models that will lead to generate income in the short, in the medium, and in the long term. If we speak about the history of the community concession, they really started selling standing trees in 1997. And it was really important to generate local capacities and create conditions so they can start adding value to their forests. After they sold standing trees, they sold lumber from 2 species, and now they are selling value-added products such as flooring, decking, furniture, siding, guitar components for Martin guitar, Gibson guitar, Fender, and to 20 companies in the United States and some companies such as Leroy Merlin and Harwood, General Woodcraft, and they are selling to Europe and the Caribbean. It has been taking a lot of time, but there is a great evolution in the value-added capacities in the communities now. Dr. Dean has already spoke about the EcoPan project, and this project has been developed, thank you, to the Minnesota University that has been working with us almost 16 years in the Mayan Biosphere Reserve. And the same thing happened with the Ramon Notes. It has been a work together with the University of Minnesota and ACOFOC in Guatemala. And there are great advances, and hundreds of women benefited through this value change. And it has been a real collaborative work between the government, the communities, the universities, and the private sector, the NGOs and the private sector. It is not a achievement of only one organization. To generate those impacts, it is necessary to work in a partnership together. Some key for success in this project are the clear right over large areas of high value forests that the communities and the companies has. The ACOFOC, that is the Community Forest Association, that is a grassroots organization, has been doing a great job in the social aspect and advocating with the government for the rights of the communities. And the government has taken an active role co-management the process, not only regulating the process, but facilitating all the activities with the communities and the private sector. The enterprises, for example, ForestCon, who is a second level enterprises, have been playing a fundamental role adding value to the products and diversifying the value chain, generating more income for the communities. FSSC, with its standard, has been playing a very important role because, for example, Guatemala is one of the countries who can sell more mahogany globally because the communities has been managing in a responsible way the forests of Guatemala doesn't have a code in CITES, in the International Agreement of Trade for Timber Species, because there is abundant mahogany in these forests, while other countries such as Bolivia, Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, Belize, they have codes. They cannot export big quantities because the species now is an endangered species. Working in access to markets, responsible markets, and finance has been an important word. My perception and the reality in the field is that we have been doing a good work access to markets, but access to finance is a big area that we are working during this time because it is not easy to access to finance for the forest sector because the financial entities doesn't have financial instruments to support the forest sector. And the other key area for success is the long-running donor support for technical assistance that this process has been having through USAID and other donors. Some pandemic impacts that the communities have are the following: lack of markets. The first year of the pandemic, most of the purchase orders were suspended or canceled. Now the market is starting again. Lack of finance. The community has to pay the cost of maintaining the forest fire prevention, even they were not selling the product because the purchase order were canceled. Lack of job during those years, it has been very difficult to generate jobs for the communities because the purchase order were canceled, so they were not selling the products. And they have to adjust some forest management practices to face the COVID situation. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Jose. I know that one of the things Kurt sent out said that you had lots of threats on your life because of this kind of work. Was that mostly early on, and have they subsided?
Yeah, when we start this work, well, I was very young, and we were in an internal war, and when we declared the Mayan Biosphere Reserve, there were a big fight between the guerrillas and the army, and we were in the middle. But beside that, there were some illegal activities, strong illegal activities, where the army was involved, especially related with illegal logging, with the high value species. And I was during that time the director of the National Council of Protected Area, and we had to face those illegal activities. And so I received 82 threats, and they shoot my car 3 times, and they put a bomb in my home. So it was a little difficult during that time, and it took a period of time to organize the situation, empower the communities, create the organization, because we start from zero. The National Council, when we start with 40 people to protect 2.1 million hectares. And the government wasn't clear what direction, what policies really approved. And we proposed the policies, and then the government endorsed the policies, and the organization started growing and empowered. And but at the beginning, we lost some people. They killed some of our safeguards. They killed some technicians. You know, it was difficult. And in the period of the development, we had to work with the communities, because we are working with communities now where we have some professional, but at the past, most of the people couldn't learn and read, you know. So the way how you train and educate, they should be, you have to adapt the techniques so they can better understand. That was thing. The other thing is that most of the people, most of the communities was used to work with the private sector, because that area was given to 9 enterprises, and every enterprises has short-term concession, and the member of the communities were workers from those private sector. But when in 1990, when the policy changed, the government decided to grant the concession to communities, not to the private industry. And that was a big fight, because so the private companies really were defending the areas where they were working. But after a certain period of time, the leader of the private sector understood that the main objective was not only only to generate income, if not to protect the forest and the biodiversity. And is why now you see the forest protected, because the community are the guardian of the forest. They protect the forest because they live from the forest and they have income and jobs there. So now the situation is much, much better than when we started.
For either you, Jose, or Dean, so what about the other countries? I mean, this seems like a great model. Is there something similar in Honduras, Belize, other places? Will it work there? Are they doing that?
Yeah, it is a great question. It's a great question because when we start in the earliest, in the late 80s, we went to see some models in Bolivia that they have an advancing model there. In Mexico, that they have the Plan Piloto Forestal Mexicano in Mexico, in South Mexico. And we took those lessons learned and we brought to Guatemala for the concession. But the good things in Guatemala is that people learn, they internalize the model, they got empowered, and now they are paying back to Mexico what they learned 3 years ago, you know, because Guatemala is more advanced. So now we receive every year people from Colombia. We are now supporting Colombia with their model. Honduras, Peru, Cameroon, Congo Basin, Kenya, Indonesia. Indonesia has a strong social forestry program, but the model is different than the forest concession. So the government and the communities have been visiting Guatemala, and they are looking how this model can be implemented there. And we as a Rainforest Alliance, we can office in those countries, and we are facilitating exchange of experience, tool, and knowledge between communities and government.
Oh.
With Dr. Dean, we have been working too in Ecuador, Indonesia, Honduras, and Guatemala, right, Dr. Dean?
Right.
Do I forget another country?
I think that covers it, yeah.
And Mexico, right?
Yeah. And I think to mention, we've been in discussion with Jose Herman and the rest of the team at Rainforest Alliance about how we can take this model and adapt it to some of the other countries that they work in. Up until now, we've really concentrated on Guatemala, but at this point, we've learned a lot in the process. So we are hoping to extend that a little further.
We've got this great national forest laboratory here in Madison, and there are probably some others in the country I don't know about. Are they involved in any of this, even in terms of applications of new products or helping research, diseases, other thing about what's going on in other countries?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. I don't know if Jose Roman would know. That's a great lab. There's no doubt about it. And I'm not sure how involved they are in Guatemala with some of the products there. We're working with the folks in bioproducts and biosystems engineering here to actually doing right now kind of a carbon footprint of some of these products, the supply chain. And that there's been a lot of interest in that as a way to document that. And it's becoming more important as companies are asking for this information if they're going to use these products and get involved in that supply chain.
It's interesting to me. My son used to work at the International Crane Foundation in Baraboo, and they, of course, were working to preserve the cranes around the world. And particularly the ones they were having trouble with were in China, where the cranes would come in and be eating the rice from the fields. And of course, the farmers want to shoot these endangered Siberian cranes that had flown over the hump. And they convinced them that it was better for tourism for them. They could make more money by not killing the cranes they were eating their food, the rice in their fields, and setting up other things for people to come in. I just to watch and to view the cranes and that.
Yeah.
So the conservation, the improving the livelihood and driving the conservation, just like you said. Are there other examples of this type of, I mean, they have cranes and forests. I mean, how this must be an economic, you say the market should drive this. Are there other examples of this type?
Yeah, I think, tourism is a good example.
Shelton is so incredible.
Sorry. Yeah.
Go ahead. I don't know.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you mentioned tourism, and that's something that I don't think Jose Roman mentioned, but I have a student there right now looking at the impact of tourism on the communities and conservation. And it's something that where it works very well. I've worked in Nepal, and they have community forestry there. One of the things I'm interested in is community-based natural resource management. So, Guatemala, obviously, that's what they're doing. And then Nepal, they have one of the oldest community forestry programs in the world. And around Chitwan National Park, which is, I think, their most visited park, which is in the Terai, the lowland region in Nepal, they have community forests around that. And it's been interesting to watch how that's evolved. When they kind of got malaria under control, a lot of folks were trying to move down into that area of Nepal, put in agriculture, and the local communities resisted because they lived off the forest. But as that program has developed, they've moved more into tourism. They've generated a lot of income with elephant safaris, jeep safaris, and then the national park also dedicates a percentage of their income to these communities around the park. And it's one of the places in the world where you're seeing an increase in the population of rhinoceros, which had been an endangered species there.
Wow. Kurt, you've been to the place where Jose, have you been up there where Jose works?
I have not been in that to see him, but I haven't been in that region. Yeah. One of the first trips I took through Guatemala, but it's a pretty good distance from the highlands that I've spent most of my time.
Yeah, we're hoping to get Kurt there.
Yeah, you are invited whenever you can come. We'll be waiting you here.
I absolutely will make it there.
A question I had for you, Dean, on your Minnesota work, is that the cover crops that you're working on, is that scalable?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're seeing, a lot of examples of larger. When you talk about that, to larger farms, or when you talk about scalability.
Yeah, I'm talking about getting other farmers to adapt
Yeah.
it and doing it on a scope like they would do, I don't know, soybeans or rapeseed or whatever,
Yeah. A couple of things on that. One is there are some larger farmers that have adopted it and are doing it, but it is, we've in this process right now, we've developed case studies of these farmers that have tried it and it's been successful. It takes a few years. So we're really looking at, farmer to farmer type encounters to promote it more. These case studies that will be online and accessible, and then connecting some of these farmers so they can talk among themselves. But that's kind of where we're at. I think the interesting thing right now for me is when you look at cover crops, they are providing the financial benefits. They're lowering the cost of inputs, they're increasing productivity over time. Farmers can get into the field earlier in the season because it stays drier because of changes in organic matter and soil structure. So cover crops on their own, we're seeing some farmers talk about it is a win-win for them to put in cover crops. And so we're trying to get that information out. It's, every field's going to be a little bit different when you talk about cover crops. But we see, good opportunity there. Then, and the pennycress, the oil seed, if that became an opportunity, then that's another source of income for the farmer. And I think that could help that adoption. But we're seeing some good adoption, but never where we'd like to see it. But it is, you know, I remember there's a crop consultant that was at one of our meetings. He said, "Yeah, I tried it 1 year, it didn't work, and you know, I'm not going to do it again." It takes, you know, 3-4 years before you see those good benefits.
Are you guys considering other forest products that I mean, are there some that you're looking at? You talked about Ramon nut, you talked about the palm fronds, but are there other ones that you're looking at? Or
Yeah, so it's the allspice. Let me see, honey.
okay.
You know, and then honey's almost, you know, a commodity crop. So there we're looking at, and then for all of those, we're, you know, developing the story around, you know, kind of nesting them within the Maya Biosphere Reserve, the environmental social benefits, but then looking at the functional benefits as well. And finding companies that are interested in that. We'll be at the Natural Products Expo West next week.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, trying to, you know, talking to some of these companies, seeing if we can get them interested. The other thing we're working on is just making sure we have the supply.
And you were talking about working capital as being a challenge for you as well. Do you want to explain that a little bit and what that sort of?
Yeah, that's true, especially of, you know, the timber, and then Ramon is where we've been dealing with it the most. So they have community organizations that are in charge of getting the Ramon harvested, delivered to their processing facilities, and then the buyer in California. And so when people harvest the Ramon nut, they want to be paid. But the income from the sales of the Ramon nut does not come until it actually reaches the buyer in California or the processor in Coban. So if they don't have enough money to pay the harvesters, they can't gather the Ramon. So what has happened, the buyer in California has an order that she needs, you know, on an annual basis. And if they don't have working capital, they can't harvest and get it to her. So we had a meeting in January, and we brought her and brought the communities together in Guatemala to discuss the issues. So they're now, through both her and then the processor in Coban, they are providing some working capital, but that it continues to be an issue. You know, the same thing is true of timber. And when you're talking about timber, to get ready for these timber sales, it could be in the millions of dollars sometimes, because they have to harvest the timber. If they're processing it, process it, and the income doesn't come until later. So, you know, having the working capital to pay the workers that go out into the forest, whether it be Ramon or the timber, that's an issue.
Yeah, for example, with the timber frauds, the communities are adding value only to the 25% of the current supply, because they don't have the capital work to do the value for the 100%. So now they are processing around 60 containers per year. But if they will have capital work, they can do it 4 times, you know, and they will increase the income for the member of the communities, and they will increase the income for the community enterprises too. So yeah, the capital work is very important, and to grow and scale up the work in the concession is one of the main factors that does not let the communities to grow. So yeah, we are working to find solution, but when you go, for example, to the financial entities, they don't have financial instruments to support with finance to the forest sector, because they will require, for example, as a warranty, the land tenure titles, and the community only has concessions. So it is not a warranty that they recognize, most of the banks. So it has been a very difficult topic for us here not only in Guatemala, but also in the region, in Latin American region.
Your discussions have been emphasizing or including the importance of government as a partner. How confident are you about the stability or the commitment of government and the support of government as a partner?
Yeah, the good thing in the concession is that the government have approved the contract for 5 years more. And that is very good because this give the right in the long term to the communities. Usually the National Council of Protected Areas is one of, I would say, one of the most stable organizations in Guatemala. The government really believes in the social forestry in Guatemala, and it has been supporting it for the last 3 years. So we have a very, very strong relationship with the government of Guatemala. In Peru, for example, that I will say is the second or country more developed with agroforestry sector. We have a very good relationship with CERFOR, the organization related with forestry activities. And in Mexico, we have been working for many years. The communities in Mexico are very well organized and they have a strong relationship with the government.
That sounds good. That's a good question. We have a question in the chat that says, in Wisconsin, our Menominee Reservation is a local example of community-based forestry. The question is, any national forest or state forest areas in the U.S. that might become community-managed concessions? Dean, you know of any?
That's a good question. I don't. I mean, the tribal areas are a good example of that. And Menominee is a great example. They've done a great job managing those forests and benefiting from them. It's funny because when I talk about community forestry, you know, in Minnesota, a lot of times that is communities that have forest areas. So it's a little different. It's the parks and, you know, green areas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I can't think of any. And
one thing that when you were talking about borrowing ideas from each other, Jose, and other places, and I was thinking about the program you have, Dean. I don't know if you're familiar with our Green Tier program for the DNR here. And it's the whole thing about what you said. A lot of time corporate is viewed as the black hats. And with the Green Tier program in Wisconsin, which has been around now for probably 20 years, companies come onto it. They have to take care of. They can never not already have been a violator. And then there's strict things too, but it relies on good actors. And that you do have some good actors who want to do the right thing with it and will proceed because they know the triple bottom line is something both social and economic that matters. And that was borrowed or stolen from the Netherlands because of the dairy industry, and that's where Wisconsin's came from. So this thing of stealing good ideas from each other is not new.
Yeah. It's good. You know, we were just talking to the marketing guy from Rainforest Alliance, and they've been able to kind of develop partners, you know, kind of the good actors. And that creates some opportunities too. But yeah.
Well, it's good to be the witching hour here. Thank you, Kurt, for setting this up. Dean and Jose, I don't think we've had an international speaker before, Dennis. Maybe we have.
Yeah, you're right.
But thank you so much. And Dennis, you want to talk about next week or 2 weeks?
Sure. Actually, before I do that, thank Kurt again for setting up another program for us, which will be really interesting. And that is, we're adding to our schedule, May 24th, another session in which we'll talk about the future of banking. Really important and something that, unfortunately, we're being reminded of the importance of banking when we have these discussions of sanctions because of the conflict in Ukraine. So banking is pretty critical to economies, and a lot of changes going on. So that'll be another session that we'll have that we just added. 2 weeks from today, we're going to be meeting with Senator Tammy Baldwin. So that ought to be very interesting, and it's a great opportunity for us to have a good discussion with her.
And I want to say, Dean and Jose, you guys are inspirational. This is just a phenomenal
Absolutely.
thing to watch what you're doing. And it makes me happy to see this kind of work is going on in ways I had no idea about. And thanks again, Kurt, for helping point that out. And good luck with it to both of you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
everybody.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.